Hello. Welcome to semi-final panel of our conference. The panel is co-organized by the National New Strategy Center and the Warsaw Security Forum, which I have a pleasure to represent here. Welcome. Thank you to all of you who decided to stay with us. After the 2 days of intensive talks. So thank you for your patience. And I'd like to welcome our panelists. We're still missing James CARAFANO from the Heritage Foundation. He will join us in a minute. But among our panelists, there are General PELTIER, who represents Ministry of Armed Forces from France. France is, of course, partner country of this conference, which also is like symbol of French commitment to the region. Also, France will be partner country of the Warsaw Security Forum, which is, of course, great thing for us. With me is also Nicole KOENIG from the Munich Security Conference, also very important partner from us, from Germany. Charles Powell, who represents Elcano Royal Institute of International Affairs from Spain, and Rob DeVee, founder of the Hague Center for Strategy Studies. This Hague Center will be also co-organizer of the NATO Public Forum. So if you wanted to get invitation to the NATO summit, please make sure to say hello to Rob after the panel. So as I mentioned, we are close to the conclusion of this forum. So a lot of things have been said already, and we don't want to repeat all the issues, in transatlantic relations. We had the opportunity to discuss during the 2 days. So let me focus rather on the future, on how we can work together to improve the transatlantic relations at this stage. So as we are still missing our colleagues from United States, so let's grab first the European perspective. And let me start with the question to General PELTIER. So actually, of course, there was another panel concentrated on European strategic autonomy. But to be honest, I think I also personally participated in the Weimar parliamentary mission in Washington D.C. 3 weeks ago, and actually I saw that in Washington D.C. there is still very poor understanding what European autonomy means, and actually a lot of congressmen, senators, people from American think tank community still have in mind, to some extent, President Macron interview from his travel to China. So actually, some people in Washington D.C. think that European autonomy is a little bit about, to continue the trade between European Union and China, regardless, rivalry between United States and China, and also to push American companies from European defense market. Of course, European strategic autonomy is something very different and to the very much extent more complicated. But how to talk to our American colleagues to make sure that talking about European strategic autonomy, we do not send Americans wrong signal that we don't need them, in Europe any longer. General.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. And I agree with you. We must make some pedagogy to the United States in order for them to have a clear understanding of what strategic autonomy means for Europeans. But I just want to give you some French perspective about what we feel and what we think about this strategic autonomy. To begin, I just want to give you a little story. I was last December in Washington, D.C., and I've met, after the elections of Donald Trump, Trump advisor. It was during a private dinner And he told me, General, you know, don't believe 1 second that US citizens will continue to pay for European security. While European countries has paid for a very generous Medicare and social system, we Americans have paid for your security. And this time is over. At the same time, he added, you know, our priorities are very simple. Our first priority is Homeland Security and immigration. Our second priority is China, our competition with China. And our third priority is what is going on in the Middle East with Iran. And I asked him, but what about Europe? And he told me, Europe, but you have to take your part, and you have to take more responsibility in your own security. It's not a priority for us. A few weeks ago, I was in Paris, and I had Mr. Colby, and he repeated exactly the same. So I asked Mr. Colby this question, of course, but you ask us to be more autonomous, you ask us to build our own autonomy, you ask us to take more responsibility in our security. But at the same time, you don't allow us to build our own industrial defense base in Europe. And so it's not very fair. Because as you know, if you want to defend ourselves, we need also to have our own European industrial base. As you know today, approximately 70% or 80% of military assets and equipments in Europe are provided by the United States. And I told him that's the reality, and especially with NATO. And if we want us to share the burden on a fair manner, let us produce our own armaments and have our own autonomy. And he said, yes, you're right. We have to think about it. You're right, we have to think about it. Of course, we have perhaps to be better coordinated on this issue. Because I told him, and he agreed with that, the US industrial base is not able to provide Europe with all the assets that Europe needs. Because, as he told me, the United States, if they have to concentrate the efforts on Indo-Pacific, they will concentrate also their industrial base to provide all the assets to compete with China. And that's why I think it's so important, first, to build our own European industrial base in order to be not self-sufficient, but to be able to support the main burden of our own security. And what does it mean concretely? It means for France to strengthen the European pillar within NATO. It doesn't mean that we have to get rid of the US. It's not possible. And we have the United States, our best allies, of course. But we have to understand clearly the message that the United States are sending to us. That's why France and the Brits have decided to build this coalition of the willing in order to show to the United States that we are able and willing to do something by our own to ensure the future security guarantee for Ukraine. That's one of our objectives, and also to show to Vladimir Putin that we are also strong and we are also able to show muscles in order to deter, after ceasefire, Russia to resume hostilities. That's the way we are thinking in France. Of course, I will be able to develop better, more, and perhaps to ask a question, but I think I speak too much, and I will give the floor to
okay. Thank you, General, for this explanation. I think it's make our American colleagues sit here like more secure on our perspective when it comes to European strategic autonomy. So let me turn on right now to our colleague from the Netherlands. Hague will be hosting NATO summit. So probably Europe, you have some infos from the horse's mouth, and maybe if you could share us your insights. What should we expect when it comes to the NATO summit in Hague? Should we expect like more, tensions in transatlantic relations, or maybe alternatively we show strong unity within NATO, against the background of the summit?
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for having me here. I think the NATO summit will be a little bit different than we expected a while ago. Because President Trump made clear that he wants a deal, and the deal is the Hague Pledge, 5%, 3.5% GDP for defense, and 1.5% for cyber and infrastructure. That is probably on the table, and that is it. As far as I understand it, there will be a very short communique, a declaration or whatever. It's the Hague Pledge, and that's it. There will be no discussion about Ukraine, there will be no discussion about Russia, and that's it. So one afternoon, that is probably the session. Are we happy with that? That is very difficult to say. Because there is a big debate going on in Europe. I think that President Trump achieved something that President Putin could not achieve, and that is the rearmament of Europe. And that is quite something that he achieved in doing that. But he also achieved in the economic restructuring of Europe. We are lagging behind the US. In 2008, we were equal in terms of GDP, collective GDP in Europe, and now we are lagging behind 20–30%. So we are to blame, that's for sure, because we discuss the autonomy, the defense autonomy in this part of the world for ages, and we didn't do that. So not the Crimea, not the intervention of or the war started by Putin in Ukraine, but Trump was the real wake-up call. So he achieved a lot. Now the big question is, of course, what are we going to do in Europe? As far as I see it, we are moving now from Plan A to Plan B. Plan A is hope, but hope is not a strategy. So forget Plan A. Plan A is about we hope that deterrence will stay there. We hope that America will be a reliable partner. No, we're now moving to a situation where Plan B says that we probably should have more defense autonomy. That is really something President Trump wants, but the implications are huge also for transatlantic relations, and I think that needs to be said. So we need, as Europeans, we need NATO for procedures, command arrangements, collective assets, headquarters, standardization agreements. It's absolutely crucial that we keep it. We can also do it, of course, in the European Union, but it is not very effective to do so. So there is now a discussion, of course, going on, and that didn't go unnoticed, that we need more independence, also from the US in Europe. And trust is gone. I think that is the key issue here. And that means that the implications are huge. That means that we now are thinking about how to organize our collective defenses without America. And that could sound good for President Trump, but the question is how good this is. And the reason is, of course, that if you are independent in the sphere of defense or the economy, you follow your own course. You do what you want. And that means that you weaken the transatlantic bond. And that is exactly what we see right now. Now, in the short term, we can do a lot with little money, by the way. If you look what the American what America is. It's a provider of troops. Well, there will be a troop withdrawal. Last week I heard what there was in Tallinn, the new ambassador, the American ambassador to NATO, argued that we probably will have 20% less or something. Okay, that can be done. Crucially, it's a force integrator, and that is, I think, absolutely necessary to think about how to replace the US as a force integrator, because the whole C4ISR structure, so the whole command and control structure, intelligence, strategic reconnaissance, you name it, is absolutely crucial for commanding the diverse European forces. The Americans can do it, we can't do it. But we now are looking into this problem and we can do it too. But we can only do it if we use, for example, the Delta system of the Ukrainians. And we link it to our own satellite systems. We looked into the problem and we can do it. And that means that you can have real strategic autonomy. The US is also a provider of long-range weapon system. Can we replace it? Oh yes, we can do that through long-range drones. But then we have to also work together with Ukraine. And extended deterrence, can we replace it? I'm glad that there is a French general here in the forum, because we now have discussions on on nuclear sharing or on other ways of sharing the nuclear risks in Europe. So we also here we can achieve something. And I'm not sure if we go that direction, if this is what the president wants, because this makes us more independent from the US, and that means that we will develop our own policies. For us Europeans, the cooperation with Ukraine is extremely important, because we can use their knowledge, their innovation cycles, their way of building, for example, drones, short-range drones for the battlefield, but also strategic long-range drones to enhance our own defenses. And that's exactly the discussion that is now taking place behind the scenes. So let me round off by again saying that President Trump achieved something that Putin could not achieve, and that the consequences of this are highly uncertain. We see a similar phenomenon happening right now in the field of our economy. This will be restructured as well. For the first time we have a serious debate on implementing the Draghi report, which is about innovation, competition and what have you. And there is of course one extremely weak point in Europe, and that is unity. What I see right now is quite astonishing. There is more unity than I expected, but we also know that our countries, our political systems are vulnerable to foreign interference, and so you can still undermine and weaken Europe. So the big issue is, how are you going to deal with outside challenges, which is for quite a few Europeans the US, Russia and China, and at the same time you see the challenges from within. That is a big challenge we have to deal with, and so I'm not that optimistic that we will achieve, but at the same time the Trump presidency unleashed powers in Europe that are really unheard of. So far, so good, but you never know what will happen in the long run. I would like to leave it here.
Thank you very much, Rob. So let me grab right now American perspective. So James CARAFANO is of course very influential, conservative intellectual in the United States. So James, I planned to ask you questions if you believe that European security is still part of, core national security interests of United States. But during this conference, you explained many times that you do believe. So my question is do you think that same thinking is, in the White House? That Donald Trump believes that European is vital for Europe is vital for the American interests. And what about the people around Donald Trump? Do you think that they believe that strong transatlantic relations are extremely important also from American point of view? And what we as a Europeans can do to convince our American partners that Europe can be, important partner when it comes to wider international security. So what is American wish list, to Europeans expect of defense spending, which is pretty obvious?
Right. Yeah. So I think the topic of the panel's actually in the rearview mirror. I don't really think these are real issues anymore. We're going to have a transatlantic community. We're going to have a vibrant NATO. None of us are going to abandon Ukraine. Look, to be honest with you, I do think it is a bit unrealistic to talk about true European strategic autonomy. Right? That would be, at best case, decades off if you had the economy and tech base to do that. And so to say, well, yeah, we'll be strategically autonomous 20 or 30 years from now, well, who knows what the world's going to look like 20 or 30 years from now. So the reality is the world that all of us live in is going to be a world where the fundamental security to protect the vital interests on both sides of the Atlantic is going to be rooted in NATO, and I don't see that changing. I want to agree with my French colleague. Matter of fact, I have not agreed with the French so much since Yorktown. This is the issue. This is the only real issue that we should be talking about, which is what is the future of the defense industrial base? Because if there's one thing that we've learned in the Ukraine war that we haven't talked enough about is it's fine to be able to defend your territory, but then the other guy says, fine, I can't win a short war, but I can beat you into the ground. I can bomb your cities. I can kill your people. I can shut off your electricity. I can hammer you with North Koreans until you fall. And so the defense industrial base is part of conventional deterrence. So having a robust European defense industrial base is maybe the most important thing that we have to have on the table. And I don't really see this as competition with the United States. To be honest, I think if we're honest, the reason why we don't have a robust European defense industrial base now, because you have a lot of technical knowledge and a lot of skills, is because there was no demand for weapons. I mean, the reason why I bought American weapons is because nobody could do the scale to really make a European defense industrial base practical to compete. I think we all champion and cheer on building a independent European defense industrial base that is sustainable, including infrastructure that is protected and secured. Does that mean and you're right, the U.S., as you pointed out, the U.S. has plenty of business itself, right? We can't satisfy our own demand. So, but does that mean that that we're not going to have a transatlantic defense industrial base? I think the answer to that is no. And matter of fact, I think it's going to be global. One is we're going to see more to speed the process up of making European capacity and capability faster and more robust. We're going to see more strategic partnerships like we just did with Lockheed and Rheinmetall. I think that's, so there are areas where American companies are going to come in and we're going to partner to build more robust. And it might not just be American partners. I mean, we've already seen, for example, the Koreans supporting in Poland, Japanese and other allies as well. So I do think there's going to be a Western global industrial base, and there are going to be niche areas where we're going to bring in strategic partnerships to help accelerate this process. And the other thing is, I think if we're honest with ourselves, there are going to be also niche areas where there are capabilities that really only the U.S. industry can put on the table right now, that if you want that capability, you need to buy. And so I just say where we're going, and actually there's three things which are absolutely totally essential. Number one is deep strike, right? Because the lesson of the Ukraine war is kill all the crap before it crosses the line. And the virtue we have now, particularly with Ukraine as a Western nation, is the deep attack is not where it was when I was in NATO, and where targets were really, really far away, right? Now, literally, every European nation with the weapons that are in inventories today can kill every strategic target in Russia that needs to be wiped out. and could have the capacity to kill mobile foreign nations. And that, I think, the Russians will recognize as a very serious deterrent threat. And actually, I think that is the most important element in terms of linking to the larger extended engagement umbrella. So deep attack to me is definitely number one. Air and missile defense is absolutely right there. Anybody who believes that the Russians are only going to threaten military targets has not been awake the last 3 years. We have to be able to defend our cities. We have to be able to defend our infrastructure, and we have to be worried about ballistic missiles and drones and airplanes and be able to control our airspace. These are expensive, big, important projects, and they require a lot of cooperation on all sides. That's two. And then, of course, we also have to be able to defend against non-kinetic and the gray threats as well. So those, I think, are the really growing demand areas, and where I think there's both space for cooperation. But you're absolutely right. I mean, this is my dream future. I mean, we should never live in a world where the free world has only one country that can produce a 6th-gen fighter. That's nuts. Or only one country that can deliver access to space. That's super crazy. Or only one country can develop a deep attack missile. Or the notion that only the United States can develop Patriot, provide Patriot. This is suicide. So I think you're exactly right.
It's nice that we have such level of common understanding and agreements. Yeah. That's great. Let me turn on right now to our German colleagues. So actually, Germany was one of the most criticized country by the administration for inadequate defense spending, for some past projects like Nord Stream 2. Some of them, of course, they can be explained. But nevertheless, a lot of things changed. In the last couple of years, Germany significantly increased defense spending. Actually, increased defense production. As well. But actually, there were still some issues which didn't support Germany's position. Whole discussion around tanks for Ukraine, Taurus missiles, and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, we have new opening. We have no new coalition in place. So what should we expect from Chancellor Scholz and new German coalition? Do you think that Germans' actions, will come exactly, will follow the Germans' potential in terms of economy and wider capacity, let's say?
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for having me in this round and at this forum. Small correction, Chancellor Merz, but that's a question of habit, I guess. No, I think what can we expect from the new German government? I think we can and we should expect more German leadership on security and defense, and I think there are several reasons for that. The first one is that this government and Chancellor Merz have a very clear ambition. Now, Merz, even before entering office, stated that he wants to transform Germany from a sleeping to a leading middle power. We then had this promise that he wants to do whatever it takes for European defense. We have a coalition agreement that is very clear about this ambition to lead in Europe, which promises that Germany's army is supposed to be the strongest conventional army in Europe, which promises that Germany wants to be the central hub for NATO, and which also promises stronger support for Ukraine. So we have a lot of promises, and I think if we look back to the past 2 weeks and to the start of the government, we can also see that there are some indications that Germany is willing to live up to this promise. We had Chancellor Merz travel to Warsaw and Paris on day one. We then had visits to both NATO and EU headquarters. We then had this very symbolic joint visit in the Weimar plus UK format to Kiev, also the joint call with President Trump. So I think we had a strong symbol of unity and of solidarity that we saw there. So that's on the one hand, there's strong ambition and there are signs that Germany is eager to live up to this ambition. And the second point has been mentioned quite often already is that, of course, it's about money. It's about the fact that now the new German government, as compared to the previous one, actually has the financial firepower to live up to this security and defense leadership. So we had this promise to do whatever it takes. We then had this rather bold move to decide the loosening of the debt brake with the outgoing Bundestag, above 1% of GDP. And that's, of course, a major shift, especially for the CDU. It's also a major shift for Friedrich Merz himself, who hadn't really mentioned that during the campaign. And of course, now more recently, we had also this backing to Rutte's 5% spending plan, so 3.5% for regular defense spending and 1.5% on defense-related spending. So we have ambition, we have some symbolic moves in the first weeks, and we have the resources, but I would also want to shed some light on another aspect that has been also quite visible in the past few weeks, and that is that German leadership will have to start at home. We have seen a historic defeat of Friedrich Merz in the Bundestag in the chancellorship vote in the first round. He missed the vote with 6 votes. And that shows just how fragile the German majority is. I mean, we're speaking here about 52% of the seats. So that's fragile. And what we have also seen in the past few weeks, and also in the negotiations surrounding the coalition agreement, is a reminder that, of course, on the one hand, foreign policy, EU policy is now concentrated for the first time in many decades in the hands of the CDU, but still the CDU will have to deal with 2 other parties. And there are some differences, and we have seen that, just to mention 2 examples. The first one was on the question of military service. So the SPD was in favor of a voluntary model, and the CDU was in favor of obligatory service. And in the end, we have a compromise formula in the coalition agreement, which states that for now, we will have a voluntary model. This for now is important because I think many doubt in Germany whether Germany will be able to fulfill its troop targets, 203,000 by 2031. With a voluntary model. So here we might still face some tensions, we might still face some shifts, and of course very much linked to this aim of being the strongest conventional army in Europe. And the second point is what you mentioned as well, is on this whole debate on the Taurus delivery. Here, before taking office, Merz was quite clear. He said, yes, well, we need to deliver Taurus after consulting with our European partners. Now he has become more silent, which is also related to a kind of shift in communication strategy, saying we need more secrecy about the deliveries, which might be sensitive. But on the other hand, we also have a debate again with the Social Democrats, and the Social Democrats continue to oppose the deliveries, and let's not forget that the Social Democrats hold the defense ministry. So these examples, just to sum up, I think we have seen a strong start, a strong promise. There's the message, there are the means, but in the end, this leadership will have to be rooted at home, and I think perhaps the most tricky part will be to kind of build this consensus at home and to also maintain this consensus over time.
Thank you very much. Let me include right now the perspective from the south, from our colleague from Spain. Actually, along with Germany, I believe also the countries of the so-called southern flank were especially indicated by our American friends that you not fulfill obligation when it comes to defense spending. So, what's your perspective on that? Do you think that countries of the southern flank do their fair share when it comes to contributing to the wider transatlantic security, and how to convince people in Spain, in Italy, who are far away from the flashpoint, that we should maintain high level of defense spending and we should continue for the years to come?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be in this panel with such distinguished speakers, and I always enjoy listening to James, who is so sanguine and upbeat about the Trump administration. This is in marked contrast, by the way, James, with a visit to the Heritage Foundation about a year ago, where my interlocutors confidently predicted that within 2 months of coming to office, the Trump administration would bomb the hell out of Iran, nuclear facilities and Iranian National Guard headquarters. It hasn't happened yet, so, you know. Not sure who you talk to. Well, I'll give you some names later. Chatham House rule. Anyway, so that's one surprise that the Trump administration hasn't yet produced for us. Fingers crossed. As far as the South, basically I would argue that the major Southern European tier countries, Italy, the third largest economy in the EU, Spain, the fourth largest economy in the EU, are contributing fairly. They are doing their bit. Although in the Spanish case, perhaps, this has been more difficult than many of us would have liked. We can talk about defense spending and how Italy is responding to the challenges of the Trump administration. As you may know, Giorgia Meloni, whom I think is a wonderful prime minister, has decided to develop a special relationship with the Trump administration, and Italy, I think, is in the process of purchasing about 115 F-35s, many of which will be partly assembled in a factory which is located near Torino. So she has decided, I think, that a special relationship, a bilateral special relationship outside the EU or NATO channels is one way to go. We in Spain, of course, have a left-wing government, which is not expected to behave accordingly. But let me just say a couple of things briefly about Spain and NATO. Spaniards have never really felt terribly warmly about NATO because initially their defense relationship with the West was a product of bilateral base agreements with the United States, which started in the 1950s and 60s under the Franco regime. So you could say that Spain joined the West through the back door, through these defense agreements with the US, which, of course, the Spanish people were never consulted about. Sadly, this means that NATO has always been tainted, if you like, by this original sin. It's generally been associated with the US's support for the Franco regime for about 30, 40 years of its existence. So unlike Italy, or unlike France, or unlike the Netherlands, GI has never liberated an inch of Spanish territory. And this means that, by and large, in contemporary Spanish political culture, there is much more support for the EU than there is for NATO. However, we have Mr. Putin to thank for a very significant change in that attitude. And according to the opinion polls that my institute conducts every 6 months, incredibly, 3 months after the most recent Russian aggression of Ukraine 3 years ago, Spaniards identified Russia as the single most important threat to Spanish national security. Now, this is an amazing sea change. The Ukraine is, to paraphrase a famous politician, a faraway place about which Spaniards know nothing, and yet there was a massive surge of solidarity. There are 300,000 Ukrainian refugees living in Spain, 70,000 Ukrainian kids being educated in Spanish public schools, being paid for by the Spanish taxpayer, and nobody has ever questioned this during the last 3 years, which I think is significant. I would personally have liked to have seen more military aid, but instead I think Spain compensated with significant financial and humanitarian aid. Now, the biggest problem is defense spending, which you asked me about. And as you know, Spain has been a laggard. Until recently, Spain was only spending about 1.27% of GDP on defense. This, I think, to be fair, is partly the consequence of a very difficult first quarter of the 21st century that Spain has experienced in political and economic terms. First, there was the massive impact of the 2008 financial crisis, and then a brutal double-dip recession during COVID, at the height of which unemployment reached 26%. So together with Italy, Spain was particularly badly hit. Now, very few people question the need to increase defense expenditure. The Prime Minister has recently promised that Spain will reach the 2% threshold by June. This is somewhat miraculous. A coincidence, that's right. And a lot of creative accounting is obviously going to be at work here. But there is definitely a recognition of the fact that Spain has to do more, not just because of the NATO headline goal or objective, but simply because as a result of those two recessions, the Spanish armed forces were cut back very, very severely. So given that Spain right now is the fastest growing European economy, it grew at 3.4% last year, it's growing at 2.5% this year, as expected. Hopefully this government will find the ways and means to increase that defense expenditure. It's not going to be easy. It's a coalition government which can't even produce a budget, get a budget through Parliament, so that's obviously a limiting factor. But as far as the contribution and the whole question of solidarity is concerned, let me just say a few quick things about what Spain is doing for the transatlantic relationship and for Euro-Atlantic security generally. First of all, Spain plays a significant role in the air police mission in the Baltics. That's a rotating mission, as you know, involving all three Baltic states. It is present in Central and Eastern Europe as well, in Latvia, in Slovakia, and here in Romania. All in all, that's about 1,700 troops. Here in Romania, Spain has a long-range detection radar and a tactical air detachment. In Turkey, Spain has deployed a Patriot missile battery at the request of the United States, by the way, a request which no other NATO country responded to at the time. And I think the US administrations, successive administrations, have always been quite grateful for that. In addition, Spain is part of NATO's permanent naval groups, which are deployed in the Med, in the Baltic, in the Black Sea, in the northern flank, and in the southern corridor, which runs from Hormuz to the Suez Canal. And this, I think, is a significant contribution to deterrence, to interoperability, and to maritime security more generally. And finally, we have a rather useful little base called Rota, which James may have visited at some point. It's actually the most popular US naval facility anywhere in the world. If you are there's an annual poll among US naval officers, where would you like to be posted? Rota always comes right at the top. And right now, Rota home ports 5 destroyers, which are part of NATO's anti-missile defense system. That's about 3,000 US naval troops plus their families. And in addition to that, though, these ships also perform specifically US naval missions. For example, they sail up and down the Med. They actually have a presence here sometimes in the Black Sea. And, for example, they were most recently involved in military operations against the Houthis. So all in all, this is not a negligible contribution. Of course, it could be greater. Italian contributions are very similar. The US presence actually in bases, military facilities in the Italian peninsula is actually quite phenomenal. And it's interesting that it's so politically acceptable. It's not debated. It's just part of the Italian scenery. So basically, what I would argue is that countries like Spain and Italy are making a significant contribution. However, there is a debate about whether, what's in it for them. In other words, do Northern and Central and Eastern European NATO countries realize that we actually have an incredibly dangerous southern neighborhood, about which NATO doesn't really do a great deal? I'm thinking specifically of the Sahel, of course, but also in general, political and economic instability leading to migration issues and so on in the Maghreb and the Mashrek. So I think both Spain and Italy in particular, this is also true of Portugal, would like to see some solidarity coming south as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles. We have 6 more minutes, I see, but maybe we are still able to grab 1 or 2 questions from the audience. So does any of you wanted to ask the question to our distinguished panelists? No one? Really? Okay, so I turn out to our panel with my question. So actually, I think that along with the defense spending, another important topic on the NATO agenda might be the NATO positions towards China. We identified in the previous strategic concept China's strategic as one of the most important challenges for the NATO security. But the question is, what does it mean? What we can do with that? So actually, I might imagine that there will be some expectation from the American administration, from Europeans to do more, to be more involved in Indo-Pacific. So I'd like to ask our panelists, what's your position? What should be the role of the NATO in Indo-Pacific? Should we repeat to this out of area type of the thinking and extend NATO operation, in the wider terms? And do you see any risk for the NATO cohesion if we start to think in these terms? So let's start maybe with the General Peltier.
Yes, I think that we have to prioritize. Our priority today is to face our closest threat, and our closest threat is Russia. This discussion we have with our US counterparts at the Pentagon, and of course with Mr. Colby, and he said very clearly, okay, Indo-Pacific for American, Europe for Europeans. It's clear. It's also a clear message. I think that NATO is first to defend Europe, and today we are not ready to defend our continent. So we have to prepare our defense as Europeans and let, of course, our US partners to concentrate the efforts in the Pacific, because in the Pacific is their priority. For me, it's the main message that we can deliver to us, Europeans, because I think that we have to concentrate our efforts on our main threat, which is Russia.
Okay, thank you very much. James, your perspective. Would you like to see Europeans in the Pacific, or we should rather take care of our own court and let US act in...
I mean, there are European sovereign nations that have interest in the Indo-Pacific, and they should defend them. That's the right and responsibility of every nation. NATO should be about the defense of NATO territory. I don't like out-of-area missions, so I think we completely agree. The only thing I'll disagree on is that the statement that Europe is Europe's problem and Asia is US problem. The reality is the United States is part of NATO, and it's going to be part of the security and defense of the North Atlantic community, which includes Europe. Asia is not America. Asia is the United States, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Australia, and many small islands and other places, and India. So the United States is not dealing with with free and open Indo-Pacific and providing against China alone. It's actually doing that with allies. And in the Middle East, it's the same way. There's nothing the United States can do in the Middle East without friends and allies. So I love Burge, he's a great friend, but the United States cannot be decisive in any major theater, Asia, Europe, or the Middle East without friends and allies. So they're always going to be part of that collective defense picture.
Thank you, James. Rob, I think the Netherlands adopted Indo-Pacific strategy, and you also actively contribute to the security of the region. So do you think that does Asia, it's European problem as well?
Of course, Asia is a European problem, but the question is not what we should do, but what we can do. That's the real question. And if President Trump forces us to focus on collective defense, that means that we will put our money in collective defense and not in expeditionary capabilities. And the expeditionary capabilities are huge. That is very, very expensive. That is really the big problem. We can solve our problem, and I don't entirely agree. I agree with you, James, that of course it's crucial to have a defense industrial base and that we must focus on air defense. Absolutely, that's for sure. But we face a short-term problem which we can solve relatively easy, and we were quite surprised when we came to that conclusion. And it is not big money; it's relatively cheap to do it. And how to do it? You have to look what's happening right now, the front in Ukraine. That's how to do it. You should stop the adversary from maneuver warfare. You should build trenches. That is exactly what's happening right now in the Baltic States, Finland, etc. That is not that expensive, so you can do it. You can restore deterrence at low cost. And of course, you're absolutely right that on the long run, you need to invest in tanks, artillery pieces, and what have you. And yes, and that takes a long time, but you can restore the deterrence quite easily and pretty fast. But it means by definition, that we will focus on collective defense for the next few years and not on China. And that is exactly what I said with the unwanted consequences of how President Trump is behaving right now. If the trust is gone, you focus on collective defense and not on China. And you maybe even force us to have a different economic discussion with China. I don't want it, I don't like it, but that could be the consequence of the dynamics that are now underway.
Can I just add real quick? So I agree with you, everything, right? If you can only defend your homeland and you don't have an expeditionary capability, you do not have strategic autonomy, right? And so no, that is true. And you guys have global, it is, let me just finish. You guys have global interests as well. And that's why the United States is always going to be your partner, because if you need to do an expeditionary thing and it's in a vital interest, the United States is a partner that will do that with you. China will never do that. I don't take the threat of we'll just do business with China seriously. First of all, because I believe in European values, and they really don't want to do business with people that make stuff with slave labor and are supporting Russians killing Ukrainians. And the only interest that the Chinese have in Europe is in destroying your market. So I hear that we'll just do business with China, but we all know it's not real serious.
James, I think we can continue this conversation, during the break, because we are out of time. So final sentence from Nicole and Charles, your take on Asia.
No, I think I have nothing much to add. I agree. I think we're already overstretched. We had this argument that the Spanish and the Italians are complaining about, there was a time where we're speaking about the 360-degree NATO, and probably it's not the case anymore. So we have to focus the resources. I mean, one area that we have to focus on is perhaps the interlinkages between the theaters and, for example, Chinese influence on the Balkans.
Cheers.
Yeah, very quickly, I agree that China is not just a US problem, it's a European problem as well. And there is a conceptual linkage, actually, between the Ukrainian theater and the Taiwan Straits. Now, the question we can ask ourselves, given that we don't have the capabilities to do anything terribly serious in the Indo-Pacific, well, the French and the Germans perhaps, and the Brits, but not others, is how can we alleviate and assist the United States in terms of burden sharing by dealing with other regions that would otherwise also require their attention. In other words, the main systemic long-term threat to US benevolent hegemony is China. It's in our interest that the US should succeed in that conflict. So the question is, to the best of our ability, I'm not saying that we have an enormous amount to contribute here, is what parts of the world can we assist the US in so that they can do their thing wherever it needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles. We are definitely out of time, but a very short yes or no questions to you, James. Should Zelensky be invited to NATO summit, and should he participate in NATO Atlantic Council? Should Zelensky be invited to NATO summit and participate in a meeting of the Council?
I think Secretary Rubio already said the United States has no objection if Zelensky attends the summit. So I don't think it's a non-issue for the United States. But to your point, the summit's going to be about what the summit's going to be about, and then it's going to end. So I think it's a manufactured issue, quite honestly.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to you. Thank you very much to the audience for staying with us. Enjoy your coffee, and please join me in the applause for our speakers. Thank you very much.